very, very much for taking time. The voice of authority. Thank you very much for taking time out of a busy schedule to join us tonight for a presentation that I've really been looking forward to. As of this afternoon, almost 100 of you have registered for the session, and I'm going to guess that probably our numbers will get up closer to 40 in the next few minutes. And it's very gratifying and reflective, of course, of the importance of the topic being addressed tonight. While it's early evening here in Toronto, I know it's the middle of the night for people in Europe. We had a couple people on our first webinar from Ukraine, as well as Australia, New Zealand. So a hearty welcome to all of you who've joined us from far and wide. A quick note, let me start with a quick note of explanation about what's going to take place tonight. In a few moments, I'll introduce Annamarie Hatcher, our presenter, and she'll present for about 30 minutes or so. During her presentation, we'll stop at a couple of points to ask you some questions to get some feedback. And after her presentation, and I'll report on that feedback during the course of the presentation, but after Annamarie has finished her formal presentation, we'll throw it open to questions that you have, and we'll have a good 30-minute or so discussion. And afterwards, at the end of that, I'm going to invite everybody to stay on for another 2 minutes just to complete a short survey. And those of you who do will be eligible to win one of 2 free subscriptions to our quarterly magazine.
Can't hear you, Tim.
Thanks, Annamarie. I think I need to keep this talk button pressed down, and that's what I'll do. Can you hear me now?
I heard that, but not now.
Okay, well, no, that's great, that I know what I need to do and what I did wrong a moment ago. So just to reiterate, or just explaining, it's one of the big surprises in the last couple of webinars is how many people actually knew almost nothing about our nonprofit magazine. So I'll just say in one sentence that our focus has always been to provide youth educators with the most innovative, practical ways to promote environmental literacy and global awareness among young people, whether inside or outside of schools. And over the last 10 years, we've also had the opportunity to publish. That's okay. I've just come back, but yes, to produce a handful of books, some of which are of the best articles from Green Teacher and so forth. And so that's Green Teacher, and that's enough of all of that. I will say, though, that as a small nonprofit, you will have noticed when you registered for this webinar that we gave you the option of making a donation. We've chosen to make these webinars free, but if you find at the end of this that you really found it worthwhile and enjoyable, I would strongly encourage you to go to the greenteacher.com website and take out a subscription or consider purchasing a book or even making a donation when you register for an upcoming webinar. Anyways, without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce Annamarie Hatcher. And I will say as an aside that as an editor for many years, I had been hearing from educators all over North America and Australia about traditional ecological knowledge in universities and colleges in particular. Native American, Native Canadian educators were struggling with how they could introduce the traditional ecological knowledge of Native peoples into and get it develop an academic respect and a public profile for it. And I was 3 years ago when I first came across the work of Annamarie Hatcher and her colleagues at Cape Breton University. They were the first of all the educators, Native educators I had spoken to over the years, who were actually trying to translate traditional ecological knowledge into practical activities for young people. So as a result, she and I and her colleagues worked together, and in the fall of 2009, we published a special theme issue of Green Teacher called Two-Eyed Seeing, which showcased the work of Annamarie Hatcher and her colleagues at Cape Breton University and in the First Nations, the Mi'kmaq people in Cape Breton Island. So without just a bit of background about Annamarie, you would have seen some of this when you registered. She's a senior fellow with the Institute of Integrative Science and Health at Cape Breton University. She came to Cape Breton as an assistant professor in the biology department, teaching various MSIP courses and biology courses, both in the community and campus. She did one of her degrees at the University of Western Australia. She's widely published and has taught in classrooms from pre-primary to postgraduate in 3 countries. Annamarie, welcome.
Thank you very much, Tim. And I'm most interested in hearing where the audience is from. So I think we have a question.
Yes, and if everyone could take a moment just to type into the box that you see on your screen, you can just use the short form if you're from Minnesota, MN, or ON from Ontario, or if you're in Australia, AUS, whatever works, type it in and then hit submit. And in a few minutes, we'll do a report. Annamarie, can you advance the slides, Annamarie? Annamarie, I think what you need to do is press the talk button, and then you can start speaking. Hi, everybody. I think we've got a difficulty here at the moment. We seem to have lost our presenter. She's here, I'm sure, but we've lost audio for her, and we're trying to get that back.
I'm back. Sorry about that. Tim spoke too quickly when he said that we were going to go tonight without any glitches. I apologize. I'm sure it was my computer.
Not to worry. It's all yours, Annamarie. Can you advance the slides as you're going, or do you need me to do that?
At this point in time, I'm going to need you to do that. So I'll keep my talk button depressed, and I'll just give you a heads up when it's time to change, okay?
That sounds great. Yes, I think. Go ahead, Annamarie.
Hi, I hope that everyone can hear me. I really appreciate you giving me some time this evening, and I hope that everybody has got good weather and is ready to sit down and listen to what I have to say. So thanks again for coming. And here's the outline of my talk. First of all, I'm going to tell you who I am. Very important because I'm going to talk about science as a cultural pursuit. So it's important that my audience know where I'm coming from because my experiences shape how I see the world and how I see science. I'm going to talk about your sciences. I'm going to talk about native sciences. I'm going to talk about cultural barriers and bridges, the relevance of curriculum, the role of the teacher, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about integrative science, which is the field in which I work, and the guiding principle of two-eyed seeing. Okay, Tim. Who I am. I always start with an introduction to me, and particularly when I'm teaching Indigenous or Aboriginal students, because they have to know who I am before they'll trust what I say. So I'm going to start by telling you that my place is Halifax, Scotia. That's where I was born, and I lived there until the end of my master's research, which was at Dalhousie University. For my master's, I worked on the ecology of salt marshes. The wanderlust of youth and becoming married to a wanderer had me out on a freighter to Australia just after I finished my master's degree. I stayed in Australia and moved around a lot for 13 years, and then I returned to Canada with a PhD, 1956 Land Rover, and 2 sons. Back to Nova Scotia where I did aquaculture. For 2 years. Then I left for a small country in the Caribbean where I spent 3 years. I taught there in a local elementary school and had another son. Then back to Nova Scotia, actually a teaching position in integrative science at Cape Breton University. I see that we have at least 16 people from the United States and 3 from Canada. So I'm interested if anybody has been to Australia. Here's some of the requisite slides of my adventurous life, diving in the Great Barrier Reef, working on a mussel farm in Nova Scotia, and that's not me in the water, that's me with the blue jacket. And I did a fair amount of work on the oceanographic vessels. This is the Hudson in a harbor in Nova Scotia. Next. So when I was teaching in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I became aware of the huge differences in the culture of the home and the culture of the science classroom that I was trying to introduce my students to. So looking at the cultural context of science was a bit of a revelation to me. To me, science had always been the high road, objective and true. Next, please. It was an easy transformation for me to move to Cape Breton and teach science to Indigenous students. My teaching position at Cape Breton University was in integrative science, and this is an innovative program designed to work in the common ground between Indigenous Western worldviews. And it's this experience that provides the background for this particular talk. And I'm going to hand it, okay. Next, Tim suggested to me that I talk a little bit about terms that I'll be using in this talk. And which of these terms you use is a function of where you are. Aboriginal is from the Latin ab origine, which means from the beginning, first or earliest. It's equivalent to Indigenous. Indigenous means born or produced naturally in a region. Native means one of the original or indigenous inhabitants of a region. And you often heard the terms Native North American, Native American, or Native Canadian as identifying the original peoples of Canada and the United States. The term First Nations is a common one in Canada. It came into common usage in about the 70s. There's no legal definition for the term. And it's not really a synonym for Aboriginal peoples because it doesn't include the Inuit or the Métis. The Mi'kmaq people, or Micmac in English, is the First Nation whose territory includes the Canadian Maritime Provinces, part of Maine, and the Gaspé Peninsula. And it's the First Nation with whom I've done the most of my work with.
Thanks, Annamarie. So we now have a question just to get a sense of the audience. We know where you're from, as Annamarie mentioned a minute ago, but if you could take a moment, we'll give you 10 seconds just to tell us whether you're actually a classroom teacher, whether you teach science, or many of you may not be teachers at all, but let's find out.
Science as we know it today took shape during the scientific revolution in the 1600s. It's, as we know, a quantitative objective approach, and it involves a disconnection between the observer and the observation. For example, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the science method, which can be ascribed to the English philosopher Francis Bacon, who defined the scientific method in its classic form as the use of inductive reasoning to draw conclusions from an exhaustive body of facts. So science as a Western, and Western as a Western Europe approach is empirical, and it arose in opposition to the authority of church and royalty. So we can look back at science as we know it today, particularly classroom science, as originating with the formation of the British Association for the Advancement of Science in 1831, and one of their goals was to give a stronger pulse and more systematic direction to scientific inquiry, and we've lived with this ever since. Next, please. Science is a cultural pursuit. Eurocentric sciences are first and foremost anchored in culture, especially in the culture of nations that advance globalization today. From an anthropological perspective, science is anchored in the Euro-American culture, irregardless of the culture of the scientists. And cultural classes are especially significant in socially marginalized students, for example, Indigenous students, because they feel alienated in standard school classrooms. Next, please. Some characteristics of Western science: it's empirical. We deal with hypotheses. It's systematic, accurate, valid, reliable, objective, critical, and skeptical. Next, please. Native science, on the other hand, and I would refer you to a book by Gregory Kite, published in 2000, called Native Science. Native science is more a collective heritage of human experience with the natural world. And this is important. The words knowledge and science are used interchangeably. It's a creative, participatory process. That's a picture of me with some of my students, and we're learning which of the bones of the moose. This is one of my former students who's giving the lesson. So which of the bones of the moose are actually used to skin the moose hide? That's an aside. Next, please. The native science paradigm is quite different than the Western science paradigm. Existence consists of energy waves, i.e. spirit. All are related. All things are animate, and we're talking about rocks and water and wind, etc. And all things have spirit related back to energy waves. Next, please. In the native science paradigm, and that's why I spent a fair amount of time showing you where I was from and where I had been, land is a very important reference. So referring to events, patterns, and cycles. And Mother Earth is sacred. I always show this slide when I'm teaching students and tell them that it's not actually me, it's Mother Earth. Next, please. Please don't panic when you see this. This is from the Handbook for Culturally Responsive Science Curriculum by Sydney Stevens, and you can Google this. It's in the webpage for the Alaska Native Knowledge Network. And what it's showing is that in the two worldviews, there's traditional Native knowledge on one side, Western science on the other. There are characteristics that are in the common ground, and there are characteristics that are specific to each of the two worldviews, but there is a common ground. Next, please. So we need to build cultural bridges between these two science worldviews. But why do we need to do this for science education? It's very important that students recognize that science is a cultural pursuit. Aboriginal and African Canadian or African American students and many others face barriers in the European education system, which can lead to failure. So removing these barriers involves building cultural bridges among all students and between teachers and students. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these. The cultural barriers in science education relate to things like the discordant worldviews, which are the burden of the past, and the barriers for many students. So we're talking about race, racism, and colonization, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the colorblind view, because that's particularly important for teachers. And then the relevance of the curriculum. Often, socially marginalized students see themselves as subjects versus knowledge creators in the education system. Next, please. In terms of discordant worldviews, we're talking about the Eurocentric and the native sciences. There's a discrepancy created between the students' identities, exemplified by who am I, where am I going, where can someone like me go, and their views of school science or their science teacher, and most importantly, their perception of what they must become in order to engage in science. Next, please. So when I refer to the burden past, I was talking about the forced removal of whole generations of Aboriginal children from their communities to residential schools. And in Canada, that was during the period between 1920 and 1996. And the effect of this was to erode language and the culture and sever links between individuals and their cultural and spiritual roots. Next, please. So the barrier of race and racism. And this is something, when I started doing this work, this was all something that was a bit of a revelation to me. I guess it's something I hadn't thought about, but I'm thinking about it now. All teachers and students have a racial identity, and it's usually the white European identity that dominates. And it's a significant struggle to give equal time in the classroom to the Eurocentric and the Aboriginal or any other worldview. And often the Eurocentric outlook can become dominant by difference. Next, please. Colorblindness. Now, this is something I hear a lot. I'm not racist. I believe we're all really the same under the skin. Now, this colorblind view may appear virtuous, but what it does is perpetuate ways in which the minority groups are similar to the norm, which is usually the dominant white group, indicating that the value of these groups is irrelevant or only relevant when measured against the dominant group. If white teachers want to challenge the authority of the Eurocentric worldview and build an anti-racist, socially just, and global curriculum, they have to acknowledge their power and privilege. Now, racism is it's a very difficult topic, and it's often very difficult for teachers to deal with. But there are ways to try and diffuse racism. A respectful recognition of the student's culture and heritage helps diffuse destructive influence of racism. For example, education for Indigenous students should help them connect with consciousness and the traditions that animate their spiritual selves. And that's a quote from a work by Marie Baptiste, who is a Mi'kmaq scholar, and she's published many documents on Native education. Next, please. This is a quote from Albert Marshall, who is a received Mi'kmaq elder, and he's an advisor of our integrative science program and someone that I work with fairly closely. He says that when the Mi'kmaq spirit is alive, racism cannot affect you because you're comfortable in your own skin. You respond with tolerance and compassion and not aggression. And this was in response to a question I had. I had dealing with racism in a classroom, and this is what he told me. He said, show them their culture. They'll derive strength from that. So we're going to talk about curriculum relevance as one of the barriers as well. This is an Indian village, and I'm sure that a lot of elementary school teachers have built these with their students. Often social history is sanitized in textbooks. I'm sure many of us are aware of this. Aboriginal history and culture are often superficially treated, i.e. the students build an Indian village and then that's kind of the end of it. This has done very little to foster respect for the history of the Indigenous people or to empower the children with a sense of pride in their past. So again, curriculum relevance. And this is another quote from Albert, our esteemed advisor, with whom I don't think our program would be anywhere near what it is now. Education affects who you are as a person. It empowers you when your own culture is validated and when you see it used. Teachers need to know who they are as a valid part of the knowledge. Next, please. So the big challenge for the teacher is to empower the Aboriginal learner to see and interpret the world through his or her eyes, not the eyes of other, i.e. The dominant culture. Next, please. This is one of my students who did a project on seashells and used her uncle, who is a lot of traditional knowledge, as a resource person. Relevant curriculum is transformative. It equips students with the educational capital to deal with contradictions between the norms privileged in the school and the reality of the students' out-of-school experiences. Next, please. So we're going to talk a little bit about the role of the teacher. Teachers are a product of their own culture, and they often bring a lot of cultural baggage to the classroom. Next, please.
I'm just going to interject here, Annamarie, just to report, as we ask people to, just to report that of the 30 of you who answered the previous question as to whether you're in a classroom, I think only 4 of you said you were, and 26 work with kids outside of classrooms. So I think it's, but almost everything that I've heard in this presentation so far is just as relevant for those who work in non-formal settings, whether they be parks or nature centers, et cetera, as those who are classroom teachers. But just to give you a heads up, Annamarie, we have very few classroom teachers in this presentation. So to the question, do the young people you work with in your classes or programs express a fear of science? Hi, Annamarie. I think we've lost you there. Can you jump back in? Hi, Annamarie. If you're having a problem, what you can do is go to the bottom left-hand corner where it says Main Room, scroll down till you find my name, and then type a message in the box and hit Enter on your keyboard.
Tim, I think we have lost her. She's logged out, I think, but she should be back again in a moment, I think. Yeah, here she's back.
Welcome back, Annamarie. Take it away. I think you should be able to speak now. I think we fixed the problem.
I am very sorry about that. Every time I hand it over to Tim, my computer crashes. But I'm back now. Okay, where was I? In terms of border crossing and the classroom teacher or anybody who's doing education with kids, the key is flexibility. So you're able to shift from being one person in one context to another person in a different context without losing your identity. And those two contexts might be from the white middle class to an Aboriginal student who lives on a reserve, or an Afro-Canadian or American woman in a white male-dominated workplace, or, in my own experience, a female scientist on an oceanographic vessel. The ease of cultural border crossing can be due to many things. It can be due to being a fluent speaker of the other culture. It can be due to agreeing with the norms of that culture, or being humanly bonded with people in that culture, or having a sense of shared history. The presence of only one of those factors can make you feel at ease with your cultural border crossing. Now, I want to talk to you just a little bit about integrative science, which is a program within which I teach, and in Mi'kmaq it's called Dogwadugal Gijidagan, which means loosely translated, bringing knowledges together. So the guiding principle for Dogwadugal Gijidagan is two-eyed seeing. Seeing means looking from one eye with the strengths of indigenous ways of knowing, and from the other eye with the strengths of Western ways of knowing, and using both of these eyes together. Next, please. By concentrating on the common ground between the two worldviews and by respecting the differences, we've begun to build a cultural bridge between the two ways of knowing. Next, please. Now, the educator, whoever he or she may be, is in a position to provide the tools to empower the other learner through this concept or this guiding principle of two-eyed seeing, despite a dominant Eurocentric paradigm. I'll go back, Tim. I didn't finish that one. Students from other cultures then become more than just seekers of knowledge or subjects. They become active participants in knowledge. And this is the important point. Next. Thank you. So two-eyed science education benefits all students. It adds a cultural dimension to science. It provides context for learning about other nations, and most importantly, demonstrates that all knowledge has a cultural context. Next, please. Now, to you at the very beginning of this presentation that we had worked together on producing an issue of Green Teacher, and that's issue number 86, which is dedicated to integrative science and two-eyed seeing, and presents several activities that can be used for school children or other groups. So other ways of knowing enrich science curriculum. One of the articles in that issue 86 of Green Teacher is called Traditional Medicines, How Much is Enough? And it presents an activity. Hi, I'm back. It presents an activity, but I don't have my slides. Tim, does everyone else see them?
Yes, I think we do.
Okay, I'll just carry on regardless. It presents an integrative science activity for senior elementary and junior high school students. And it's based on some ideas that were presented by one of the Mi'kmaq elders, which I followed up and worked with a local class. We have the Mi'kmaq School Board. They have their own schools in their communities. So we worked with a grade 5-6 class on the activities associated with this article. Medicines of Our Ancestors. So it was tea made from eastern white cedar by the Mi'kmaq people that cured Jacques Cartier's crew of scurvy in the winter of 1536. This really gets the kids talking. That they talk about intercultural relationships. They talk about what is scurvy. They talk about vitamin C and nutrition. It really gets them into all sorts of different topics. So some of the questions that are asked, this is just two of the students out gathering some, in this case it's balsam fir, to try this activity. They start asking questions like, how much vitamin C do these cedar tonics really have in relation to, say, orange juice, which is what they're mostly familiar with in terms of vitamin C. How did our ancestors know how much of the cedar to use to make a tea? And what did this tea taste like? I hope you're keeping up with the slides, Tim, because I can't see them on my screen. So, how much vitamin C do these cedar tonics have in relation to, say, orange juice? And this is a picture of one of the Mi'kmaq girls in grade 5 who's doing a titration for vitamin C. She prepared a tea and measured the vitamin C, and it's a standard titration. It's very easy to do with school children. It's particularly amenable to that age group, sort of age 5 and 6, but the school was so pleased with the amount of enthusiasm that was generated by this activity that they had the high school kids out collecting different species, learning to identify the conifer and trying different dosages and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's an interesting activity. It's contextual. It provides them with a link to their past. It gives them a bit of an interest. So how much did our ancestors, how much did they know how to use? Excuse me. How did they know how much to use to get a proper dosage of these things? So if you go to that activity and read that Green Teacher article, you'll see that it was based on the length of body parts. And this is a pretty ancient way of measuring things. The foot was, based on a measurement, but in terms of conifer teas, it's based on the forearm measurement of an outstretched arm. So it's very body dependent. For example, a young child will have a much shorter forearm length than will an older person. So it's that's the way that dosage was measured. So this leads children into all sorts of activities related to the allometry of the body, to the relationship between the size of the forearm and height or weight or gender, and that kind of all sorts of activities in math that can come from this. What does cedar tea taste like? There's a whole afternoon of fun there. And don't forget the maple syrup, because traditionally these conifer teas would have been sweetened with maple syrup, which comes with a whole suite of nutrients itself. So we're down to the conclusions now in terms of classrooms. Are you in the right slide there, Tim?
I am
challenges challenges related to the educational institutions. And based on what I've told you, I just summarize those as being racism, the relevance of curriculum, the lack of teacher proficiency at cultural border crossing, the lack of effective strategies to engage parents, students, and supporting community members, because When you educate an Aboriginal student, you educate their family and yourself. It's a co-learning with a group of people, never just one student. And also the lack of innovative ways to develop student assessments, facilities, and teaching materials. In terms of teachers, culturally competent teachers can contribute significantly to the success rate of science students from many cultural backgrounds. They can foster greater understanding and appreciation of diverse cultures in our society with all students, and also of the knowledge that's been contributed by these cultures. They can improve communication and critical thinking skills necessary to facilitate intercultural dialogue. Good intercultural communicators who can maintain varied forms of communication, including the mode important to them and the mode important to the student, are very effective teachers. Now, conclusions in terms of the teaching. Culturally relevant teaching is transformative. It equips students with the educational capital to deal with contradictions between the norms privileged in the school and the reality of the students' out-of-school experiences. So the last conclusion is the plea that I'd like to leave in your ear. Educational multiculturalism using a two-eyed seeing approach is a non-hierarchical approach which gives equal time to many cultural perspectives. So if you want to learn more about two-eyed seeing and integrative science, I'll provide Tim with our brand new updated website, which has got lots of information and materials for teachers and educators. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Tim. Thank you.
And thank you, Annamarie, and thank you, everybody on this call. We did share, I did speak too soon at the beginning. We did have some technical difficulties, and I was guessing when Annamarie needed
Lost you, Tim.
Oh, sorry. And recognizing that most of you are not classroom teachers, feel free to ask. Anne-Marie's got a lot of experience, as you can tell, and feel free to ask questions unrelated to classroom teaching, but to the youth programs that you are currently working in as to how to employ teach two-eyed seeing or Indigenous science in there. And we'll give you, we'll leave this slide up here for a while, so even after a few questions have been asked, you can start. You can still type in a new one if a particular answer or a particular question that you hear in the next few minutes inspires you to ask a different question. Feel free. Oh, and by the way, yes, we will also. I'll be sending everybody an email tomorrow. There will, of course, some of you will take advantage in a few moments of the survey that we have, and some of you won't have time, and we'll send out a survey. We'll send out an email tomorrow that has both the address where the archive presentation can be found if you want to share that with others, and it'll also have the email. It'll also have the any other URLs that Annamarie will share with us that come up through questions that you weren't able to do. So let me go back to the question box. I haven't seen any questions yet, but do take a moment and. So the first question, Annamarie, is from Jenny, who asks, do you have any particular wise words for working with very young students, primary students, kind of kindergarten to grade 2, how you would introduce this Indigenous science or two-eyed seeing to very young people?
Yeah, it's very important for them to see, Indigenous art, to see Indigenous people as knowledge creators. So talking to them about Archie, about how our ancestors learned from each other and how they helped each other when they were sick and that kind of thing. It's very important at that age. Does that help?
Annamarie, yes, another question that's just been asked is can you talk a little bit about some of the things that are in common between Indigenous science and Western science?
That's a really good question, Tim. Some of the similarities are honesty and inquisitiveness. Some of the common themes in the two sciences are pattern recognition. So looking at star patterns in the sky and recognizing where you are is a good example of something that's in the common ground. Verification through repetition. So both worldviews repeat, experiments or repeat observations before they decide that that what they have is actually true. Local ecological knowledge is an important concept in both worldviews. In terms of differences, Western science emphasizes understanding how, whereas Native science emphasizes the practical application of skills and knowledge. So Western science is characterized by skepticism, and I mentioned this in my talk, whereas in Native science there's a trust of inherited wisdom. Western science limits itself to evidence and explanation in the physical world, whereas Native science includes physical and metaphysical worlds, and they're linked to the moral code.
Thank you, Annamarie. I've got another question from someone who says he teaches environmental education to urban elementary students in the San Francisco Bay Area. She or he says, most of my classes have students from at least 5 different.
I've lost you, Tim.
Sorry, the question again is, I teach urban elementary students in the San Francisco Bay Area, and students who are at least from 5 different cultures, and I'm not from any one of those cultures. How would you approach this?
I always start by visiting the communities that the students are from. So if you can, ask a parent whether you can come and have tea with them and maybe meet a grandmother or a grandfather. Have a good look around. And I work with largely university students, so I always visit the schools that they went to. They're elementary and high schools. I work generally with one culture, but from 5 different communities around Cape Breton. So that's my stance. You have to work with the community, and you have to start by visiting it and understanding. Our local community college here, they have kind of a boot for new lecturers during the summer, and they put them all in a bus and they take them from one of the communities to the other, and they spend the day there. They go to the band office, they go to the health center, they go to the elementary school, and often they'll visit 1 or 2 elders. Does that help?
Thanks, Annamarie. Another question was from Artemio, who said the Common Core state standards are going to be released in 18 to 24 months. And do you have any sense of how two-eyed seeing might be integrated in those standards?
The province of Saskatchewan has just released science curriculum based on, they don't call it two-eyed seeing, but incorporating Indigenous knowledge, and that's for grades 6 and 7, but they're working on the other grades now. So that's a very good model to have a look at.
Folks, just an apology. I think what's happening is that I'm trying to. I noticed in the chat box some of you are rightly complaining that what happens is that the screen shows you the opportunity to type a question, but as you start your question, the screen disappears, and that appears, unbeknownst to me, it appears what's happening is because I'm causing that to happen because I'm using a special button that I have as a presenter to have a look at the questions that have been already typed there, and I think what that's doing is interrupting the rest of you. So what I'm going to do instead is have Paul forward the questions to me directly, and then I won't interrupt your typing the questions in. So take your time to type the questions, and hopefully Bridge Paul will relay them to me, and we can carry on that way.
Sure, Tim.
So, Annamarie, another question that's come up is, how important are the physical surroundings of the science classroom or of the nature center or state park facilities where such, integrated science teaching might take place? Could you make it on what about physical surroundings?
Hey, Tim, that's a really good question. The physical surroundings are extremely important. These are some ways to make the space more inviting and more welcoming. Display Indigenous art. I mentioned this before in response to another question. Lots of plants, comfortable seating, make it a comfortable place. Welcome students. Encourage them to thank the custodians of the traditional territory within which the classroom is. So an acknowledgement of those who have come before us. Thread the culture of the current class with those that have come before them. So tell stories about previous students, previous speakers, show them previous, projects. The classroom culture, becomes their culture while they're there, and the past is part of that. Treat them in a holistic way. Give them assignments that might involve their families. Some of the most productive assignments that I've given have been things like bird lists, because they involve their grandparents, they involve their children and their husbands or wives, and they all go out looking for new birds that they haven't seen before. So it's a simple thing, but it's a more holistic way to teach and to co-learn. Make the classroom a welcoming place for their families. This is something that the elders have told me is very important. Don't make it kind of a prison. The student goes in and the door is closed and no one can see him and, for the next 45 minutes kind of thing. But, make the whole space a welcome space for the whole family and community. Do not treat their culture in a superficial way. And what I'm talking about here is, something like an international feast, Black History Month. What that does is, measure them against the dominant culture. Bring their elders, knowledge holders into the classroom or into the nature preserve and into the circle. Invite knowledge holders in. Go outdoors wherever possible and whenever possible. And also incorporate spirituality into regular class activities. And what I mean by that is I always talk to the students about respect for all life. We talk about only taking samples when it's absolutely necessary and giving thanks for the samples that we can, making sure that we use them respectfully and that kind of thing. So those are just a few suggestions. Hope that's helpful.
It is, and we're getting a lot of questions now. Thanks, Bridge, for your help, and to everyone who's taken the time to type them in. A question from Andy. Do you feel that it's culturally appropriate to teach this kind of Indigenous science to non-Indigenous classrooms?
I think it's appropriate, and I think, for inclusive science, it's very important that we all understand that knowledge is cultural, and knowledge doesn't just come from the mostly Eurocentric textbook. So yes, I think it's an eye-opening experience, and it will help students very much when they enter the workplace or when they enter post-secondary education, and they're exposed to a large range of cultural groups and backgrounds.
Thanks, Annamarie. Another question from Cliff Knapp. Have there been critics who have criticized the idea of dividing science into two types?
Yeah, there are always critics of yeah, science. I mean, science is a critical pursuit. So yeah, I think your traditional biochemists may or may not be critical, but they're probably not comfortable enough to step outside their ivory tower, which is kind of the way that we view it in academia. Does that help?
Thanks, Henry. And the other, James asked the question, how would you do this if you have limited exposure? He works in a national, sorry, I've just lost his question, but the idea was if you've only see people, in a national park, of course, as an interpreter, you only see people for short periods of time. How would you introduce a two-eyed seeing or indigenous science perspective into programs when you only see people for short periods of time?
Well, that's a good question. And again, I would suggest, finding out who the local knowledge holders are. Start with the naturalists, with hikers. Find out who the traditional holders of this territory were, and find out what you can about that culture, and about whether there's anybody who can inform you who's still resident.
Great, and I've just got a comment from Jennifer. Hi, Jennifer, out in the Okanagan Valley of southern British. Sorry, I lost the audio there. Jennifer was reporting that from the Okanagan Valley in southern British Columbia that they have a spirit festival rather, running with many cultural institutions that host open, free events. And there seems to be that within the native presenters and artists, there are two approaches. One is the we and they, and the other, which is sort of the suspicious kind, and the other is not we and they, but all of us together. How can we promote the latter more than the former?
I'm sorry, how can we promote all of us rather than the we and the they? Well, that
right.
gets back to... Sorry, that gets back to what I was saying about knowledge creators versus subjects. I mean, once you make that transition in your own mind, then you're much more open to look at knowledges, on an equal stance, as opposed to one being dominant over the other, which is a we and they approach. So the all of us approach is it's a very open-minded approach. And being out in the environment and listening to stories about the environment from all different people, including the native people, is one way to start putting your own mind in the common ground.
Thank you, Annamarie. Another question, quite different, asked by Artemio is, do you have a foundation structure to science instruction, such as health, environment, and energy? Or I'm guessing from my Ontario background, it was science, society, science, and technology. Do you have a foundation structure for science instruction that?
I think the answer is no, but I'm not really sure what a foundation structure is, Tim.
Nor was I. I was hoping you were going to know the answer.
No, I don't. Sorry.
A question from Nicole from Pittsburgh, who works in a science-integrated elementary school. She says, do you have any suggestions of how to work with urban families that have significant fears about using the outdoors as a teaching tool?
I came from Dalhousie University, where I taught two courses. One of them was called Urban Water Systems, and I would take the university students out to some of the, highly modified freshwater systems, within the city, and we'd find that there were little oases of life. There'd be, various rare species of plants. All you could is put on your glasses and book. So often what I do with students is I get them to sit and stare at a patch of ground for 5 or 10 minutes, and usually they're quite amazed at what they start to see. They start turning over rocks. They start turning leaves around and looking at various insects. And the longer that they sit there, the smaller things that they start observing. So I mean, nature doesn't have to be acres of forest. Nature is in the schoolyard, or it's in your own backyard, even if you have a jungle or a mown lawn.
Great, thanks, Annamarie. And I had another question which I just lost. Let me get it back.
Tim, I see a question from Nicole in the chat room. Well, actually, it's a comment about people or students coming to school in their best Mary Janes, and she wants to get them out in the mud. Well, yeah, I have had that issue with university students, and we have done nature walks in stilettos. Not me, mind you. But yeah, usually that's once.
Another question, Annamarie, is, can you recommend some resources that can help people, whether they're classroom teachers or non-formal youth educators outside of classrooms? Can you recommend some resources that are useful to teaching integrated science in their context?
Yeah, that's a good question, Tim. That Green Teacher issue 86 is an excellent resource. There's also a paper by Henderson and Skidders called The Mohawk Vision of Bioregional Education, and that's in one of the Green Teacher books called Teaching Green the Middle Years. I suggest people go to our website. We've got lots of presentations and material that they can just download. There's the Alaska Native Knowledge Network, which you can easily Google. It's easy to find. Native science is really defined by that book that was published in 2000 by Gregory Kahete, and I would recommend that highly. It's an excellent book, so that's a good start.
Great, and thank you. I'm going to take this moment to thank you profusely, Annamarie, for this presentation. And yes, we'll get. I'll get you to send me a couple of resources, a couple of those websites if you can, and I'll add that to the email that we'll send out to everybody tomorrow morning. And I want to move everybody on. By the way, there's been some questions about, which is a good questions too. When are those free subscriptions going to be announced? And some of you who, of course, have been on the last two webinars, and what's happened is we've gave people, especially the people in last night's webinar, we sent out a survey today fairly late in the day and gave people another 48 hours. So the people will be announcing tomorrow, the people who got their the free subscriptions from last week, and by Friday we'll be announcing the winners from tonight and last night's webinar. Okay, without further ado, let me move you on to the evaluation question. So please take a moment. We'll leave this slide up for a while. How would you rate this presentation from fabulous to terrible and many places in between? Take a moment, more importantly, to fill in the next two questions. What did you like best about this presentation? How could this presentation have been more useful to you? I'll hold it here for just about 10 more seconds so you can get that first question in, and I'll move on so you can answer the last couple of questions on this same slide. And while you're doing that, I want to thank everybody for taking the time to join us tonight. And we'll have another webinar tomorrow night, and we've got several by tomorrow or Friday. Actually, we'll be announcing several more on our website. We'll send it out through the Green Teacher listserv. If you're a member, if you haven't signed up for our listserv, please do that, and you'll get details of the forthcoming webinars. You can also, of course, go to greenteacher.com at any time and get the updates and the links to sign up for any other webinars that you would care to sign up for. So we'll leave this up for another 30 seconds, and again want to thank all of you for taking the time this evening or this afternoon if you're out on the west coast of North America to joining us, and once again to Annamarie Hatcher for this presentation. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Tim, for inviting me to do this. It's been a wonderful experience. I'm used to talking to an audience. Now I'm talking to a chat box. So I guess that's evolution for me.